Hello everyone, this is your host Vatsal Shah back from my own talk, and now we have Matthieu with us. He's going to talk about how to stay on the keeping on the edge and how meaningful payments data is the key to unlock future growth. Matthieu is Senior Vice President Commercials from Checkout.com, and he is managing APAC region. It will be interesting talk. Matthieu, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me first share my presentation. Keeping the edge on, especially on the data side, that's a very important element in terms of for payments. So today we're going to say how meaningful payments data is key to unlocking future growth potential in dynamic markets. A bit about myself. I take care of the APAC region on the commercial side. I've been at Checkout for 6 years. So I've seen the growth from 15 employees to nearly 2,000 employees now, and how we're trying to help merchants and our customers to grow in the payment space. So let's dive in directly. A bit about Checkout.com. In the past year, we've grown by 300%. We have 7 direct acquiring licenses, 19 offices globally, from Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Australia to London, San Francisco, New York. We process over 150 currencies. Company was funded by our CEO, Guillaume Pouzat, in 2012. We were bootstrapped until 2019. And after we did a couple of raises after that, we have more than 25 settlement currencies, which I think is quite an important element in the world of data and trying to understand acceptance rates, and also in terms of FX. Some of our clients are in the region of Hitvan, GetGo, Prism, Shellback, Shane, or Klarna Wise in terms on the acquiring side, or Novi and Revolut locally. Let's go directly. One quote from the former head of Uber Payments: the worst and most expensive mistake you can make is to lose a customer when they initiate a payment, when you spend so much money on customer acquisition. And I think this is a very key element. It's very a head of payment, or a person that actually takes care of payments, needs to always understand is, do we convert that customers to actually a paying customer? Some people pay $20, $30, $50, $100 to acquire the customer through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or other channels, and that person is ready to pay. And at the end of the day, they can't pay because of a decline, because you don't have the favorite payment option. And I think this is a very key element, is you spend so much money and then you just have a decline and you don't understand why the decline. And I think we're going to try to, during that presentation, see where are the key elements that you can check to make sure that you have this payment accepted. So payments are a people thing. I think you need to have this relationship with your customer and see how can we tailor for them. One of the quote of the COO and co-founder of Shopline is, to succeed, you have to tailor your payments offering to your market. To do that, you have to know your market. To do that, ultimately, you need to have great data. What is great data? Is understanding, how people pay in Philippines, how people pay in Singapore, how people pay in Australia, how people pay in the UK, how people pay in the US. And I think, not everything is Visa, MasterCard. Not everything is also the wallets. Gcash in Philippines, or GrabPay in Singapore. There's WeChat that is also very big, but is also very dedicated to Chinese customers. So then you have PayPal. So I think it's an important element, is who wants to pay and when do they want, and what is the demography of your customers. So people say when they go on the website, I've been permanently put off on shopping. For 52%, it's complexity of the payment process. 33% is a payment decline. I go shopping online quite often, and I just receive a decline, and you don't really know why you've seen a decline. Is it insufficient funds? And then we'll deep dive on that side. And 55% is very much on preferred payment method. A lot of retailers have been put off by using PayPal because it was expensive, but in the same time, a lot of people have seen growth on the retailer website with PayPal. And I think that's the core element. Some people refuse to put Amex because it's expensive, but at the same time, you do attract a lot of people with the Amex card. So here it's about And especially in the growing world of more and more wallets, especially in the Southeast Asia region, I think it's an important perspective is what is the growing wallet? Grab 5 years ago was not really a payment method. Now it's actually very much in demand. And I think it's about growing with the time, growing with your market, understanding your demography and which country you want to enter. So in terms of next slides, there, I think the untapped potential of meaningful data. Business lose over 20 billion a year due to false decline, and nearly 13 billion is handed to the competitors at the final hurdle. Checkout is quite into the fintech space in terms of competitors, neobanks or money transfer companies. And, what is the differentiator between different neobanks? It's quite hard. It's a bank. They offer you a card, a fancy card, a metal card, or, better FX rates. It's the same thing on money transfers. And if you go on the website, you've signed in, you put your KYC, etc., and you have a decline at the end, that person's going to go to another website because they do want to transfer money. And if that website has either the payment method that they want, Apple Pay, Google Pay, that increases the acceptance rate, they will never come back on your website, because once they've KYC and had the successful payments, they will not switch to another neobank or new money transfer. And same thing for a retail or a marketplace. And I think that that's a very important element when you actually take decision is, where is that customer going to go if there's a decline? Are they coming, trying back once, twice, 3 times, or actually they're going to leave us? And I think that's where there's a key element into that perspective of, okay, like we need to offer them what they want. You don't want to have a page necessarily of 20 payment method, because then the page is actually not looking well. Well, I actually have seen pages like checkout pages where there's 20 drop downs, and I think that's not the best user experience. Is okay, that customer actually came. You need to have a dynamic payment page on the checkout side. Is how do you actually work with the customer? And they've been using 5 times in a row Visa cards or Grab. So how do you dynamically can push actually that payment method, because they're going to use that. They're not going to use another one. So I think that's an important element. After is business aren't getting the data they need. A lot of legacy providers don't necessarily tell you what are the declines. So 65% of merchants surveyed do not receive raw response codes on failed payments. We'll discuss this a bit later, but there is around 150 decline codes that are available by Visa and MasterCard to understand why a decline has been made. And a lot of companies just put them around 7-8 decline codes: decline to no honor, insufficient funds, or card stolen, etc. And they just put it in one single bucket, and you actually don't know what's happening, or some even just put decline. And you can't actually interact with the user and the customer to understand is, okay, why is that been declined? How can you actually retry this transaction in 6 hours because insufficient funds? And you can actually push it on the email, say, sorry, we realize you cannot pay. We've seen you have insufficient funds. Maybe you retry another card. And after 41% survey do not receive any actionable analytics with their payments data. I think that's the second element, is what is analytics? Analytics is having someone in payments that actually, from your payment provider or for someone that you actually have hired. I've seen so many head of payments actually now being hired to understand this data. Is, what is 92% acceptance rate good in your industry? Well, maybe your competitors and some have 95%. So you're actually losing 3% of the sales on your side. So why you need to understand, is are you localized and not in terms of entity? Do you speak to the issuer of that of that country? The issuer is the bank. Can your payment provider actually go discuss to the big local banks and say, oh, why do I have more declines than my competitor? And then actually, surprisingly, you will have a conversation with those banks and they're like, oh, you've had a lot of frauds in the beginning of a lot of declines 7-8 years ago. So we've put fraud settings and risk settings on your business. and therefore more likely to decline a transaction where you have grown as a much bigger business. And at that moment, you just stuck with your legacy and the way you've done before, where now your payment provider can help you with the bank actually try to optimize it, And it's actually about knowing your data is, do you have with bank A 95% acceptance rate and bank B 88%? And actually, why is those banks different? And that's where you actually will need to work on it. And every single detail, if you increase by 1, 2, 3% your acceptance rate, it's actually could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue on top, and not lost customers. After 40% of merchants surveyed do not receive transaction data, which integrates with their own data internal system. I think that's also a second point, is that, how do you get access to their data? We provide on an API perspective is you can build any dashboards on top of the information that we give you. And then I think that's a very important element, is building on top of other providers. You don't want to receive an Excel sheet once a week telling you what's happening, or you don't want to go on all the dashboards and say, oh, okay, this is what's happening. I think it's also important. It's important to have it if you don't want to integrate on the API side, but it's also important if you grow your business and become much bigger to actually dynamically actually integrate it from an API. As fourth point, actually, 48% of merchants surveyed do not receive a detailed breakdown of their payment costs from their providers to allow them to help drive costs down. In the e-commerce space, everything's about competition. Unless you have a specific and unique product, you're competing on price. And understanding what is your cost and where your customers are coming from and how you can reduce it. There's payment methods that cost you 0.20, 0.40%, zero in terms of cost, and some cost you 2.5%. Is actually how do you break it down, and and if you can save 1 to 2% of cost because you're actually pushing this preferred method for you, it's not necessarily for the customer, but this is for you to have the trade-off, is do you push for your cost or for the customer? And that's where I think you always have to know, is like, maybe the first 5 times of customer, you tell that person, okay, you're trying to convert them to the website. After, you can push them to another one. And we'll discuss after, I'm sure people have seen the news that Amazon taken off their credit card from Visa. And, people might be surprised, but Visa has increased. So most of the time, actually, Amazon uses their Luxembourgish entity in Europe. And now that Visa have increased due to Brexit, the cost from 0.30% to 1.5% for a credit card. At that moment, obviously, it's 1.2% of cost for Amazon on top. And if they don't pass it on to the marketplace solution to people, then they have to take it on. And their margin is probably, it's not that high. So it's actually eating on their margin. So that's an important element. 67% of merchants surveyed do not receive fraud and chargeback analysis data. Again, if a customer is done chargeback or fraud on your system, you don't want them again on your platform. So did you receive from an API, or do you actually analyze that customer has done fraudulent transaction on your systems? You should actually always ban them from the ecosystem. Sorry. And then after grocery, and we'll see on the right, grocery, fintech, gaming is actually industries where you can improve, where the retailer percentage of business clients that don't receive raw response code of failed payments, those are the percentage. And in retail, you actually see a lot of people actually don't receive, and I think that's an important element. Next slide. Data is the lifeblood of our operation. I cannot do my job and drive payments performance without it. As the person taking care of North America, HelloFresh, and I think HelloFresh is also, if people don't know, it's food delivery at home that you have to cook very good food. And I think for them, it was, when we talked with them, it was very important for subscription, because if you're a subscription business, you can't take care of the repayments and the person you've actually shipped the goods. So for example, they were taking transaction on a weekly basis every time they were shipping the goods. And at that moment, if you actually don't manage to get the transaction and the payment going through, you're actually losing the money because you shipped them that food that could cost you $20 to $50, and you actually lost that money because there's a decline. And how do you make sure you get the money back? It's very complicated. You can try 2, 3, 5 times, 10 times the transaction on the back end, but if it's been failing, and that's why it's an important element, is knowing if that customer is paid before shipping. But at the same time, you all don't necessarily want to lose the customer and say, sorry, we didn't deliver you the food because you lost, because we couldn't take money. Please add it up, and it's an extra step. So make sure you have account updater, make sure you have network token. So, I've been on so many websites where it doesn't allow me to redo my expiry date. It's your card is expired, please add another one. Now there's a system from Visa, MasterCard, or others that actually can automatically update your card on the checkout page, and it's much easier. So on the authorization response code, there's like a fund 20051, account restricted, expired card. And I think on to follow up on the third point is that expired card is actually a bad decline. Is how do you make sure that the customer is able to pay, and you have actually updated depending of your business model. That's where you don't. I hate re-entering my card details, so to make sure you have Apple Pay or you have actually account updater. Block for fraud. Fraud is how do you actually analyze that data when you speak about fraud, because if you don't act on it, that person can come back, and we've discussed that previously. And that person coming back is also a likelihood of block fraud. But you actually can link into the email address of the customer because they might use several cards, and you're not necessarily aware of it. So you need to use that data and say that email address is linked actually to another card, and this card has said it was fraud. So you need to make sure you can link both together. Lack of funds is on the notification URL. There's actually the decline. Tell them actually there's a lack of fund, try another card. And so many websites actually don't do it. And I think that's an important element. Account restricted, that's also very high fraud related. So make sure you block it. 20154 is authentication required, is a fail with 3DS is, okay, the customer is failing with 3DS. Is it a genuine customer? Is it actually your fault? Is it there's a lot is about the UX of the 3DS redirection. And how do you make sure that you actually want to convert that customer? Maybe it's a genuine customer, but you're actually pushing 3DS because the transaction is above $500. You actually need to push 3DS. You can put customers actually before that and tell them how fast have they been on the checkout page. Prints on the iPhone, and understanding is like, okay, they've done checkout, they've been on our website. You can analyze with your marketing team and say, they've been many times here. We don't necessarily need to push for yes because actually it's a genuine customer. And I think that's an important element, especially more and more people that travel, they don't necessarily receive the code from their banks, they don't receive the SMS, it's quite complicated, and you actually don't want to lose the sale. So that's another important element. There's around 150 response code, and so many more that they can help you actually see why card from card pickup to decline to honor is decline in the honor in the payment space is a bit the black box. No one really knows why the certain issuers will put lack of funds or insufficient funds into decline to honor. And we try with the schemes and others try to educate them and say, hey, can you just put actually the real decline reason? So for our merchants, it's much better. And I think that it's just a work in progress. You'll have less of those issues in other payment methods. But lack of funds always, if it's a wallet, is always an issue. That's a key element. Finding the right payments partner, we discussed that, and I think there's a curve, there's a learning curve. That's one of the quotes from Cheers, one of the founder and CEO of a company that in France and Europe, and I think there's a learning curve in bad every business. Where payments relationship can last 3, 4, 5 years, and we try at checkout to handle and give a customer success manager to help you on a weekly basis to increase that acceptance rate and go from, if you have 85%, our goal is to bring you to 93, 94, 95% and see how many more payments can you do it, you know, and it's not going to take, it takes time, not going to happen overnight. But I think that you integrate, you try to optimize, you try to understand the data, we help you understand the data, you try to change the UX page, see actually how you can push, or you can actually add more payment methods. You can localize. It's also very important in terms of cost and acceptance rate to localize. If you have an entity in Singapore, you have an entity in Philippines, you have an entity in Australia, in the UK, Europe, or US. I think it's very important because acceptance rate, banks are more likely to accept your payment if you're actually pushing that payment with a local entity. So one, you have a better acceptance rate. Second, make sure you push also domestic currency, because domestic currencies issuing banks are more likely to accept the transaction if you push domestic currencies, and especially very important in the Southeast Asia region where people like to pay on their own currencies, and you know they don't want to get charged FX on that side. And then after, over time, you'll realize more money, more revenue for your business. I think one of the quotes, and that's an important element for more on the Microsoft side, is there's been very much a mind shift. When I've seen, still young in the payment industry, but been there 6 years, there's been a very shift in terms of understanding the data side. You're not just collecting payments, you know, your acquirer or your payment provider is not just there to, here, I'm going to take your payments and give it to you the next day or 3 days later or a week later. It's a bit more than that. And your brand is very important. It's how easy it is to pay now. I don't pay on most websites. There's no Apple Pay because it just, you know, well, I won't come back as often. For example, Deliveroo with Apple Pay, I can pay very easily. I don't have to add my card. And I think Amazon has shown yesterday with their announcement that it's more about the brand. They issue themselves Amex and MasterCard. That's why they take off. And I think that people want to associate themselves with payments now. Google has Google Pay, Apple Pay, Facebook has launched their own wallet, Amazon has their own wallet, Grab has their own wallet. And I think more and more companies will have their own wallets. We'll see how the world goes. It's how many wallets can we have? Before it was how many cards can we have? Now it's how many wallets. But with the blockchain and more crypto exchanges, people will be able to pay with, you know, the crypto coins. They'll be able to pay with Binance Pay. They'll be able to pay with Coinbase Pay. And I think that's an important element, is who is your demography? How do you differentiate? You know, if you have a lot of users that actually buy crypto, it might be interesting to do a partnership directly. And how do you actually analyze this data? Is who buys on your side? That's more marketing element. But with your marketing team and your team is like, how can we actually differentiate ourselves with offering, you know, Facebook Pay or offering Binance Pay? And I think that's a key element, is how do you differentiate? How do you push offers? Do we get 20% off because actually we're doing a partnership with them? And it's very been a mind shift. It's not anymore just cards. It's not anymore just collecting payment. It's a full journey on the customer acquisition. And if the person is happy and very simple to pay, they will come back because they will like, this is easy. And e-commerce is here to grow. There's going to be more and more websites. There's going to be more and more, you know, competitors out there, and you need to make sure you differentiate yourself on understanding your demography, understanding your payment page landing, understanding in which market you are, understanding of why declines and how you can increase more revenue, and understanding of the user experience. And that's an important element. So yeah, that was the presentation. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yes, it was insightful session. And then we have a couple of questions coming from the audience. The first one is, what according to you must be the key features of fraud prevention and detection tools to ensure that payment is secure?
Cool. Again, I think it depends of one key element that we've seen is, firstly, what is the transaction value? if it's $1,000 or if it's $20, obviously it's not the same. Second question is, what is the profit margin of your transaction? Because I take note of banks and fintechs is their profit margin is probably 20 to 40 basis points, so 0.20 to 0.40% of a transaction. So it's nearly nothing. So if they have fraud, if they have more than 1% of fraud, they're out of business. Literally, they're out of business. If you're a retailer or if we are other where you can have a profit margin to 30 to 40% of the item you actually sell, then you actually can be a bit more. So fintechs and money transfers will push through DS. They will always push through the secure because they can't allow actually having a chargeback. If you're a retailer and you're like, listen, I have much more profit, we allow ourselves to have a 20 to 50 to 70%, 0.20 or 70% of fraud ratio because of profit margin. We allow our losses to be able to actually accept more customers. So I think it's very much what is your business model? What is your profit margin? What is your demography? That's an important element. Who do you sell to? Do you sell to younger people, older people? Which region do you actually sell? That's another one. There's way more fraud in the US than in the UK. Why? And understand, how you actually try to target them. And on that side, there's many, we can help while there's actually external partners. The key element is very much fingerprinting on the iPhones or phones. You can see or actually tracking the mouse. So tracking how fast the person actually spent on the website. Are they returning customers? And all this data, everyone has the data on their website. You just need to ask the marketing team. And if that person, if I want to go shopping online to buy, I don't know, a jacket, it's going to take me then more than 25 seconds for me to go from buying the jacket to landing on the website and buying the jacket. You want to see the colors and everything. And if that person's done it on 25 seconds, there's an issue. It means that person has not been browsing. They're just here to buy something and is more likely to be fraud. And I think this key element is detect data on how you capture them on the UX, on the platform. And after actually, if that transaction you actually do on pre-authorization, you see that there's likelihood to fraud, then actually push the transaction on 3DS. If that person has been there 5-10 minutes, it's a returning customers, yay, cookies. So you actually know there's a returning customers. You can actually say, okay, that person's been shopping 5 times with us. It's less likely to have fraud. So many different elements. But what's very working well right now is very much the trying to understand what's happening on your platform and to actually have to decide which payment system you're going to go through.
That's great. One more interesting question from the merchant angle. How do you suggest payment providers ride the wave of uncertainty around changing customer behavior, rules of the country, and so on? Let me give an example. Country like India. Recently, we got a change in recurring payments. Now the authorization is stopped. About one amount we need to go back and pay, and a lot of issues are there looking at the regulations. So how do you suggest payment providers ride the wave of this uncertainty?
Yeah, the India case was very interesting. I think everyone was a bit taken by surprise. And it's the same thing with, for example, 3DS 2.0 in Europe. It's been pushed back for, I think, nearly 18 to 24 months now. Because issuers were not ready, PSPs, payment providers were not ready. And that's a major issue. It was supposed to be implemented in 2019 and 2018, 2021 is finally nearly being forced in October. And I think this is, make sure one of the elements is make sure when you pick up a payment provider, and there's quite a few out there, are they up to date with the regulatory perspective? What ask them about your business model? Are you recurring? It doesn't really affect on the Indian side if you're not a recurring business, but if you are, make sure, and how many of your customers actually pay in India. I think it's all about payment expertise, and that's what I will tell if I'm a merchant. Is very much, do you have access to a customer success person? Do you have access to someone actually that manages your account and not just a support email? It's like, oh yes, this. I think it's very much important to, the payment sphere is everyone wants to invest in payments companies right now. It seems that there's a lot of valuation. They can spend money of having a good customer success for you. No worries. They raise 20 to 100 to 1 billion. They can add some customer success who actually understand payments, payment experts that help you actually grow your business. So just make sure you actually have an interaction with someone out there that can actually help you. So obviously there's so much new regulations. Every country has its own regulations now, is on the payment space. And it's very much about trying to have a meaningful relationship with either as a PSP with the merchant. Is like, okay, like I see that you actually sell 10% of the customers are in India, and there's actually a change of the recurring perspective in India. Maybe we need to implement this for you. How you doing? Same thing of 3DS in Europe. It's like, how do you actually? Oh, I see. For example, Sweden is the country with the best implementation of 3DS. But certain France, for example, where I come from, is not that great. It's how actually like, oh, be careful. In 2 months, there's the new change, and you need to adapt this. And are you going to push 3DS? Are you going to make sure you have the UX experience? So it's very much a communication between two. It's very much a partnership, and that's why I think it's trying to get this for this session is very much to make understand our merchant that payments about a partnership, about analysis of what you actually do, and you need to work hand in hand with your payment partner that is here to help you. Obviously, more if there's more transaction, there's more money for the pay PSP also. So I think is knowing what's happening, and that's through the help of PSPs.
Thank you, Matthieu, for an insightful session. And see you later.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.